Hi, my name's John Miller. I'm from ICA Associates, and I'd like to tell you a little story about how to write a piece of legislation, well actually the white paper that leads to a piece of legislation, in only 4 months, and to do it with all the stakeholders who would normally shoot it down in public afterwards. So in 2006, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources gave me a call in about January and asked for some process advice in how to engage people and get this thing written. So what we did was we set up an expert panel, people who really know their law and their legislation in all these different jurisdictions. They're the ones charged with writing a white paper. And they could do it, any individual could have done it on their own, but instead they put 6 people in the room, said do it together. The Minister of Natural Resources himself came into the first meeting, sat down and said, you guys got the power, make it happen. And that was really essential to making the whole process work. But what I did was I held those people back from writing the white paper, had them create a bit of a blueprint with lots of gaps in between, lots of sketchiness so that they know it. Anybody who was to see the material would say it's only a first draft. It was really just a chart. Then we convened a reference group, I would call it a reference group, of critical stakeholders. These are all about 20 people who are extremely well informed on the topic of endangered species. And they were invited because they all hated the current legislation. It was totally out of date and an obstacle to development as well as protection. So around the table there were representatives of trappers, of agriculture, of urban development, of farming, of mining, of forestry, all of these extremely well-informed stakeholders. So first meeting was with the writers group to create a first draft. Second meeting was with the critical reference group. And in that meeting, we actually built consensus around what all these different antagonists really think needs to be in the new legislation. And they really shocked each other with how, not so much agreement, but how much consensus they were able to reach. And then they could compare what they came up with what came out of the first meeting with the writers. And they revealed some gaps, and the writers were there to hear what they were and to go back and do a second draft. So now at the third meeting, this is with the writers. They create a second draft, go back to the fourth meeting, which is with the critical stakeholders who are now ready for me. They've done facilitation once and they're ready to work the process now. We come back and we studied the draft, and they taught each other what are all the pieces in it. And this gave people an opportunity to work, a second opportunity to work in like pairs and little groups of 3. And what happened in the middle of this meeting was there were 2 people who stood up and said, this is the first time our 2 organizations work together. Normally in public, we throw things at each other. We're professional antagonists. It's the first time we ever worked together, and we did pretty good. And everybody in the room, they burst into applause. It was spontaneous. They'd never worked together, and here they're doing it, even though they technically shouldn't be agreeing on anything. Anyway, they taught each other what was in the draft, and provided further advice, deep discussions. And then at the next meeting, the fourth meeting, the writing group could really sketch out a detailed blueprint for what they're going to write. Then they went away, they wrote it. From January was when I was contracted. In April, the white paper was published. 4 months to go from zero to white paper, and then spend the rest of the year talking with stakeholders. When the legislation was created based on the white paper, it passed 3 readings, 1, 2, 3, no public outcry. The media tried to find antagonists, people who would normally criticize it, and there was none there. Nobody loved it. It was imperfect because it's a law, but everybody understood where it came from. And that thing had legs. It has worked well, and it has been like if you go to the David Suzuki Foundation, you'll see it's called the gold standard of Endangered Species Acts. And I believe it is. It's a little unfortunate that now it's being tinkered with, and there's a lot of resistance to changes to it because so many stakeholders were involved in creating it. There's some real commitment to protecting endangered species. As a byproduct, as a facilitator, as a byproduct, I like to think Ontario is a little more peaceful as a result, because these antagonists are not throwing things at each other professionally in public anymore. They can work together, and they have on other projects.